Good morning, friends. It's very good to see you and to worship with you. Very beautiful service and beautiful thoughts. And I wish I had some beautiful charts to go along with this whenever they're ready. Oh, wait. Okay. It's on me? Oh, okay. All right. Well, all righty. But it is good to see you and good to be with you. Very grateful for everyone's presence. I do encourage you to come back this afternoon. That's singing. That'll be very encouraging. And tonight's lesson is going to be on a God who works miracles. And so I hope that you will come back and study that with me this evening. I do want to thank those who were able to come out and be with us on Friday. We had a good turnout at our get together. Like 86 people showed up. It was really good. Some of you couldn't make it. I understand. You wanted to be with family. And that makes sense. But those of us who did not want to be with family got together and we had a gay old time. But I'll let you know that some of you left a couple chairs there. I don't know whose they are, but for the right price, you can have them back today, is what I want you to know. But no, just let me know if you left some chairs there. So I want to encourage us to leave here with a greater appreciation for Jesus, and that we will every day be grateful for Him. Now, to help us appreciate the fact that the Bible does say that by His stripes we are healed, that is, we're totally indebted to Him for making all this possible, for sinners to come before God. I have come across a thought years ago, and it always stayed with me. And I want to share it with you, hoping it makes the same impression on you to kind of help you appreciate Jesus as well. Because I can tell you, after looking at this, taking the Lord's Supper, it was just a little bit clearer in my mind this morning about the great, great sacrifice Jesus made for all of us. And here's how this thought develops. We all are familiar with colors and how colors can be symbolic. We see signs that have certain shapes, but also particular colors. And we know what to do based on those colors. Or even the stripes on the road. You can see a double yellow line tells you not to cross over, or a white line, or any type of marking on the road. By color, we can know what to do. Or the traffic light. Stop is red. Green is go. Yellow is speed up, right? That's what we all know. But colors, we understand, can have a meaning. And in the Bible, God uses colors at times to convey a message. I thought of what it says in Isaiah chapter 1 in verse 18 when He says, though your sins are like scarlet. Now that's a deep, deep dye. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they are red as crimson, they shall be like wool. Those are very vivid images based on colors. And something that is as deep dyed as possible can become white as snow, or as it says here, like wool. That's the power of God's mercy and the power of God's forgiveness. But color, that's the point. Color's used to express those thoughts. Well, consider this. When Jesus died, again, by His stripes we are healed, certain colors can be associated with His experiences and what He went through, especially in leading up to the cross and enduring the cross. You can look at that scene based on what is implied from colors. Here's what I mean by that. The day Jesus died was a green day, because you had people who were leading this death that were very jealous or envious of Him. And sometimes we use that color to describe envy, to be filled with envy or jealousy or green at times. And what we see in Matthew 27 is that very same thing happening with Jesus. That the reason He was persecuted was because people were jealous of Him. Read with me in Matthew 27. Now, I'll tell you right now, I'm going to throw a lot of verses on these screens, and I can't possibly read all of them, but I do want to read a few of them to help us appreciate this study. But in Matthew 27, it says in verse 11, notice with me, that Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Now, he's already been arrested. Jesus said to him, "It is as you say." And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he answered him not one word, so that the governor marveled greatly. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. And at that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. Now, Jesus made a lot of enemies. And anytime you preach the truth and people don't want the truth, you're going to make enemies. Darkness hates light. He made that clear as well. But what we see is he was not just hated just because. He was hated because there were people who were envious of the popularity he had and the fact that he was able to rebuke so many of them publicly. But it caused people to hate him. And there were people, leaders especially, who wanted that type of response from the crowd, and they weren't getting that. And Jesus was infringing on that. And so they were envious of him, and as a result, they were leading this campaign to condemn him. And it wasn't just the fact that they were envious of him, they were telling lies about him. You back up just to chapter 26, notice that this was their method. In Matthew 26, read with me in verse 59, beginning, it says, "The chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony about Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last, 2 false witnesses came forward and said, 'This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days.' And the high priest arose and said to him, 'Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?' But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, 'I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God.' Jesus said to him, 'It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven.' Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, 'He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look, now you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think?' They answered him and said, 'He is deserving of death.' Then they spat in his face and beat him. Others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, 'Prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one who struck you?'" So you can see how this thing's developing. And you have people who are determined to feel justified, or at least look justified, in condemning this man, especially to death. And the only way they could do that was through lying. And the thing that was motivating them to lie was envy or hatred. Now, when you read that, now keep in mind, this is all he went through. Again, he went through all this for us. Do you know what that's like? Do you know what it's like for people to say things, believe things, accuse you of things that are not true? I think every one of us has experienced that at some point in our life. Every one of us. Everyone who tries to live for God is going to have people who are either envious or jealous or just filled with hate. That's part of living as light in a world of darkness. You're going to have people who say things about you that aren't true. You're going to have people believe things about you that aren't true. But remember Jesus. Now, sometimes he did answer, "Are you the king? It is as you say." At other times, he didn't say a word because it wouldn't have mattered. They were determined to condemn him, and there was nothing he could say to change their mind. But what you don't read in this context is Jesus lying about them, or Jesus slandering them, or Jesus returning reviling for reviling. You don't see that. You don't see him returning threats for threats. Instead, even later on, he would say, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. So can you love your enemy? Can you bless those who curse you? Can you pray for those who spitefully use you? Can you do that? Is it possible for you to respond in love and humility and not hate when there are these forces working against you? I think we can say that's very much possible. But when Jesus died, it was not only a green day, we might say it was also a purple day. What do I mean by that? Well, they were mocking him as a king. In Matthew 27, that they were pretending that he was the king and were celebrating that. But they were not doing that out of honor. In Matthew 27, it says, in verse 27, the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium, gathered the whole garrison around him, and they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. When they had twisted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand, and they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! Then they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took off the robe, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified. Why do you think they chose a purple robe? Why do you think they chose a crown of thorns? It was because they were saying, okay, you're this king. You're this great king. Okay, let's celebrate you as this king. And they, of course, were belittling him. How bad was this? Well, what's so bad about this is these people were only breathing by the mercy of God. They were only alive by the mercy of Jesus. And yet these people, his creation, were treating him this way. And not only at that scene, but even when he was on the cross, you had people who were wagging their heads at him. And the people who were dying with him were also reviling him, the two thieves on the cross. Is it possible for you to be belittled, humiliated, and shamed, not deserving it? Is it possible for you to experience that? And is it possible for you and I to respond the way Jesus did? By having love, and by having strength and faith and courage and patience. Jesus knew what Psalm 22 said, this great prophecy, and it described his death. And it says in Psalm 22 and verse 12, Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They gape at me with their mouths like a raging and roaring lion. I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue clings to my jaws. You have brought me to the dust of death, for dogs have surrounded me. The congregation of the wicked has encircled me. They pierce my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They look at and stare at me. They divide my garments among them. For my clothing they cast lots. Can you imagine? Can you imagine Jesus experiencing this? As, of course, they're mocking him with this robe and crown, beating him, spitting upon him. But then he says, the looks. They look at me. Again, the man, even when he was on the cross, they were wagging their heads saying, okay, you're pathetic. I mean, you really are pathetic. You were talking about how you're of God. And if you really are the Son of God, then come on down from the cross. Don't let man defeat you like this. If you really are God's Son. They look at me. They encircle me. They mock me. They humiliate me. But he endured that. He endured that because he knew the price had to be paid. And I thank him for that. It was a purple day, but it was also a yellow day. Yellow is associated with what? If somebody calls you yellow, what are they saying? Right? We understand it's talking about somebody who is a coward. And the people who were closely associated with Jesus were cowards that day. They fled. When he was persecuted, they forsook him. Pilate was a coward in the sense that he knew this man was holy. He knew this man was innocent. His wife even told him, be careful how he dealt with this man. And yet, he still cowered to the crowd and delivered Jesus to be crucified. So he was a coward that day. But the one that stands out the most likely to us is that of Peter. That Peter denied even knowing Jesus. And we know this great text in Luke 22. As Jesus has been arrested and he's being falsely accused, and all these horrible things are happening to him, Peter was outside in the court. And it says in Luke 22 and verse 54, having arrested him, they led him and brought him into the high priest's house, but Peter followed at a distance. Now when they had kindled a fire in the midst of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. And a certain servant girl, seeing him as he sat by the fire, looked intently at him and said, this man was also with him. But he denied him, saying, woman, I don't know him. And after a little while, another saw him and said, you are also one of them. But Peter said, man, I am not. Then after about an hour had passed, another confidently affirmed, saying, surely this fellow also was with him, for he is a Galilean. But Peter said, man, I do not know what you are saying. Immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So Peter went out and wept bitterly. And why do you think he's weeping? He's weeping because he knew he had been a coward. He had 3 opportunities to associate himself with Jesus. Then girls, young women were challenging him, and he cowered. He wept bitterly because he had lied. He had just spent 3 years with Jesus, day in and day out. He did know Jesus and was associated with him, but he says, I don't even know this man. I don't even know him. It would be like if you're in court and you needed my testimony to prove your innocence, and the judge says, Mr. Thomas, do you know so-and-so? Man, I don't even know who that is. I've never seen them in my life. What would that do to you? Or vice versa. That's what's happening with Peter here. And the only reason he did this is because he was afraid of being rejected by people. He looked after that last denial, heard the rooster, and he saw Jesus, and he saw that look from Jesus. Like, you lied. You betrayed me. And he went out and wept bitterly. But you know, for years I've read that thinking about Peter's response. But have you thought about Jesus' response? When he looked into the eyes of Peter and he felt and knew this man had just betrayed him, and yet Jesus still endured. He did not strike Peter down. He did not hate Peter. He endured that. Jesus endured a yellow day. He endured a day of people betraying him and distancing themselves from him. But without controversy, it was a red day. It was a red day because of all the blood that Jesus shed that day and because of all the pain he endured leading up to it. We know in the garden, he's leading up to the crucifixion. He's praying to have the strength to endure this, and sweat drops of blood are excreting from him. We know that as he is facing these people, he has to experience something called scourging. That's what it says in John 19 and verse 1 even. They scourged him. But Mark's account here points out how they scourged him and led him to being crucified. I'm going to read a little bit about this. Some of you weren't here in the study we had last quarter in the auditorium. Very good study. And we looked at some of this. But here's what Jesus experienced. Flogging, scourging, was a horrible punishment. That it was illegal, it was such a horrible punishment, that it was illegal to flog Roman citizens without a direct edict from Caesar. The victim was tied to a post or hung from a wall. Either method drew the muscles taut across the victim's back. The soldier would then use a flagellum also called a cat of nine tails. It was a short wooden stick with nine thong strands attached to it. And at the end of each strand was tied something sharp, like bone or metal or glass, or metal balls. The purpose was not to lash out quickly so as to inflict welts. Rather, the soldier would attempt to rake the victim's back with the sharp objects. The Jews limited the lashes to 39. The Romans, however, were hindered only by their animosity and endurance. Often the tails would whip around the victim's face, gouging out his eyes. It is not surprising then that flogging alone was lethal about 6 out of 10 times. Those who survived were usually carried out on a stretcher with permanent mutilation. And that's from the book The Life of Christ by Moore. That's what Jesus went through. That's what he went through to provide us with the remission of sins. Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. And that, of course, led to his being crucified, being nailed to the cross. What pain. When growing up, I worked on a sod farm. And did that for many summers. And, we would, at the time, you'd have these strips of sod that would be cut and come up a conveyor belt as you're on this harvester. And on the conveyor belt, you'd have two guys on the back and a pallet in between us. And our job was to take the turf from the conveyor belt and stack it on the pallet. And you've seen those pallets stacked up. Well, on that conveyor belt, toward the end of it, there was a row of bristle brushes that just kind of helped it go along. And so, I still have scars on the tip of my fingers from that. But so many times you're grabbing that turf and the bristles would get underneath your fingernail. And you'd speak in tongues. I promise you, it's just incredible pain to have something just go through your fingernail. Well, Heather Dowdy, that happened here recently. She's walking down the steps and had the rail, and there was a splinter, and it went right up through under her fingernail. Had to go to the ER, right? Now, all of you are going to be scared to death to touch the rail, but the rails are safe now, I believe. But the idea of something just being jammed in there, incredible pain. What was it like for Jesus to have nails jammed through his hand, or most likely his wrist, or his feet? What was it like to have metal piercing your body like this? This is what Jesus went through in the crucifixion. And you might wonder, why? Why such a painful death? Why couldn't a man just have a heart attack and pay the debt of sin? Why did he have to suffer like he did? And that, of course, was the sacrifice. It is not a sacrifice if he didn't lay down his life in great agony to pay the debt of sin. And the Bible says, being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Philippians 2 in verse 8. He had to. He had to become a sacrifice for sin, and he chose to do this. And here's the thing that's so remarkable. That if Jesus were here today and that sacrifice was still needed of him to save you from sin, he would still do it. He loves you that much. He would be willing to go through all that pain again to redeem you from sin, but it had to happen to save us from sin. It was a red day, but it was also a blue day. Blue in the sense that, yes, he was being beaten. We might say black and blue. But he was a man of sorrows, as Don pointed out. He was a man of sorrows. A man who suffered greatly that day. And then his mother, right? His mother had to witness her son being treated like this publicly and watching him die. So even her, as it was prophesied, would be filled with sorrow. It was a blue day of suffering. He was a man of suffering, a man of sorrows. He was publicly shamed in the way he died. Crucifixion was an instrument of death for the worst criminals. And Jesus was associated with that. And so certainly his body was blue, his mother was blue, the disposition was blue, but he was willing to endure this. That's the point. He was willing to go through this as a sacrifice. Now you might recall when they came to the place of the skull, which is called Golgotha in Hebrew, they tried to give him wine mixed with bitter spices, gall and myrrh. But after tasting it, he refused to drink it. Matthew 27:33 and 34. And here's what can be said about that. That this mixture of sour wine mingled with gall and myrrh was intended to dull the sense of pain of those being crucified or otherwise severely punished. The custom is said to have originated with the Jews and not with the Romans. Jesus declined it because it was the Father's will that he should suffer. He would not go upon the cross in a drugged, semi-conscious condition. He laid down his life. And he did this willingly. And again, I hope we can appreciate that. But let me say one last thing. And that is, it was a black day. A black day. Now, I know in our world, Black Friday is a good day because stores are in the positive again instead of the red. But this day was not a good day in the sense of pleasure. It was a black day in that Jesus not only had to go through all that physically, socially, as he is being accused of all these things, being mistreated, mocked, and all those horrible things, and then the physical beating, the pain, and all that terrible stuff we looked at, which we need to think about. Those don't compare to this. This was the worst part of the crucifixion. And that is when he lost his relationship with his Father. When he was separated from his Father. It was a literal day of darkness because of what had happened between him and the Father. This had never happened before. In Luke chapter 23, they had never been without fellowship because even when Jesus was projecting people to betray him and leave him, he knew his Father would never leave him. John 16:32 says, "Indeed, the hour is coming, yes, has now come, that you will be scattered, each to his own, and will leave me alone. And yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me." That's the way this man lived. He went through all this stuff because his Father was with him, and he knew his Father would help him through. But when Jesus became sin, when he became sin's sacrifice, he was separated from the Father. For he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. 2 Corinthians 5:21. And so you had this major loss. Now, you and I cannot appreciate this. We can't appreciate what that felt like for Jesus to lose his Father. Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? This is new territory. I've never experienced this. And it was so dramatic that even nature itself put it on display. In Luke 23 it says, for 3 hours he experienced this, and he was sin at this point. But in Luke chapter 23 it says in verse 44, it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. Then the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. And when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. So before that, before he breathed his last, Jesus was sin. He had become sin for us. And since the Father is holy and cannot fellowship with sin or evil, he could not fellowship his Son. He lost his Son. And his Son lost the Father for that period of time. And it was seen, of course, in nature. Why? Why, God? Why would you do that? Why, Jesus? Why would you do that? It's because you are that important to me. Your soul is that valuable to me that heaven is too important for you to miss out. and so I endured it. Jesus endured a horrible, horrible day when we look at the colors of the cross. Terrible things of being betrayed by people, lied about, mistreated, mocked, bleeding, filled with sorrow, and of course being separated from his Father. But he did all that because by his stripes we are healed. And I just have one simple question. Do you appreciate that? Do you appreciate what Jesus has done for you? And I hope you do. Can you endure suffering? Can you endure people doing you wrong in life? Of course. Jesus did, because he committed himself to him who judges righteously. He knew the Father would take care of it eventually. And we need to know the same thing as well as we live in this world. May we all leave here with a greater appreciation for Jesus. If you're here and not a child of God, would you like to become a follower of Jesus? Would you like to become a disciple of Jesus Christ, this person who experienced all this for you? Then you too need to lay down your life by yielding your will to the Father, believing in him as God's Son, making that great confession, turning away from every sin you know of. It's called repentance. And then being buried with him in baptism and raised in the walk in newness of life. And you're in the body of Christ at that point. Galatians 3:27. So we sing this song to persuade you to do that. If you don't understand that, we ask you for opportunity. Or if you need to make things right with God in a public way, please respond as we stand and sing.